Hi, everyone. It's Kristen White, host of Intuition Ignition, and I have a question to ask you. Do you have a hunch or maybe a little idea that is so persistent it keeps calling to you about aspects of your life that still need to come into play? Do you wonder, especially if you're a mom, if there could be more to your life than just driving carpool and taking care of the kids? Not to say that that's not important, but do you have this dream that lays there on your inner shelves unmanifested? Well, if that's the case, you're going to love my guest today. She's the author of the book, The Real Brass Ring, Change Your Life Course Now. Her name is Dianne Bischoff James, and she completely reinvented herself and became an actress at the age of 40. So Dianne, thanks for being here with me on Intuition Ignition.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Kristen.
So, I know you're a motivational speaker now and an entrepreneur, but you're also a dynamic midlife reinventionist. So who were you and who did you become?
Well, I started out my journey about 38, and I was pretty much in midlife, and my journey started with a visit to Sonia Choquette. And as you know, she's an internationally known psychic healer visionary, and I just went there for a birthday present. I kind of was going to give it to myself because a few friends had mentioned it, and I thought, oh, this will be a fun thing to do. And this woman is going to tell me that I am awesome because I had this big career. I had a big career. I was very fortunate. I was able to buy the mini mansion across from the lake. I did everything they told me to do, have the American dream, get all the big stuff and the Prada bag and the cute shoes and the little convertible. And I had the 3 kids and I had my own business, and I was married and been married for many years. And so I went in and I thought she was going to say, oh, you just rock. But instead, I sat in her little office for an hour, and this was many years ago, about 10 years ago, and she just looked at me and started shaking her head with these little curls, and she just said, you are this unlit Christmas tree. Not one of your bulbs are firing. Everything about your life is wrong. And if you don't hurry up and grab at the real brass ring, hence the name of the book, she goes, it's going to be too late for you. And I just looked at her in this. I was going into post-traumatic shock at the time. And I thought, too late for what? I mean, what's going to happen? Is it like spontaneous combustion? Am I going to fall off into the ocean? What's going to happen to me? And she just said every single solitary part of my life was being run by a script, something that I had been told to do. I was following all the directions from mother and father, and that nothing about my life was real or authentic. And she told me, go back to stage. You could be a great actor. And she goes, I don't get to tell that to many people. She said, you're going to be an author and a public speaker and a healer. And she said, and do not come and see me again until you have written that whole book. And you write every single solitary day starting tomorrow.
Wow.
Literally just
went
in my car and cried.
Yeah. You went in your car and cried. But as you were crying, what was coming up for you? I mean, did you think she was totally wrong? Was there a part of you inside that thought, that was unpleasant, but I hear you?
Well, part of it, and this gets back into the whole hunch part, I mean, I was 190 pounds at the time, so I was a big girl, and I was incredibly unhappy about being so, incredibly overweight, but my only source of love was food at the time. So no matter what happened, I was grabbing a Twinkie to stuff for this, and if I had a bad meeting, I'd grab a ho-ho and stuff it down for that. So I was this massive stuffer, but I also stuffed my feelings because I was popping Prozac every single day. And she called me out on that, saying, you are clinically depressed. I didn't tell anyone. Prozac was my big secret because I didn't think I could function with that dark cloud over my head every day. And when someone finally called me out on everything, and I felt like she stacked up every single solitary lie that I had been living, and she took this bat and she swung it, and all of that went flying across the room, and I sat there, I felt naked. Someone actually called me out on all my stuff. And I did agree with what she was saying, but it's not like someone said, oh, you need to get a new job, or you need to move to a place down the street. I mean, she said everything was wrong, and that was overwhelming at the time. So I was sad, I was angry, I wanted to kill her. I wanted to go get her and just kind of choke her and just say, how could you say those kind of things? But as it settled in and the time passed, I realized that she was right, because everything about my gut, everything about my hunch, everything about my intuition had never been honored, not for 1 second. So I had a lot of work to do.
So what was your first step, and how long did it take?
Well, the whole process was a long step. It was a 10-year I called a reboot. I had to reboot for 10 years. But the very first step that I did is I'd always been a student of metaphysics, and I loved it. But she told me to read more books. So I went out and I wrote down every single book she said. I bought them all, and I started becoming a student again, trying to understand, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make all these giant shifts? None of which I was completely aware of whether it would even work out. I don't know if I totally trusted what she had predicted. And so I started studying again, and I started just absorbing it and realizing how off track I was with my authenticity. And I was truly an inauthentic person. She also said, march yourself off to this place called Hoffman Institute, which is, I call it a spiritual recovery mecca. It's in the wine country, but you don't drink. You just go there to deal with yourself and all these issues of being in a cover-up. I was in a 40-year cover-up. And I went back, and they for 7 days, it's you and your teacher and you and your heart, and that's all you deal with. And I came back this, like, fresh, brand-new spanking baby. I was still overweight, but I felt better about myself, and for the first time in my life, I found love, and that was love for myself. And so I had to, from that point, the minute I got back from that Hoffman Institute, I started making plans for myself, and I wrote these 14 rules for happy living. I took everything I've ever read for the past 40 years that had to do with self-help, development, personal knowledge, psychology, philosophy, and I put it all down into these 14 rules, and I started changing the way I lived. And those are what are featured in the book, which is, I think, the basis of what helps people to get reorganized and kind of reboot your mind.
I'm sure many of you listening to this podcast have had a little thought about reinventing yourself. Dianne, thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, more about the real brass ring, change your life course now. We'll be right back. We were talking about what happens when you know that it's time to change. Perhaps you have a catalyst that's an encounter like what you had, Dianne, or maybe you have a divorce or a health crisis, and that it can take something like that to help us wake up to the truth about ourselves. So I think that for some people, Dianne, that can be really scary. I mean, what do I have to change? What's this going to cost me? Can you speak to that?
Yes, absolutely. I think the one thing that scares people in some respects, although it seems almost counterintuitive, is I think our lack of inauthenticity. And that is something that comes from, I think, just programming growing up. Piaget even talks about the formal operational stages where abstract thinking doesn't even come into play until we're about 11 or 12. So we aren't really able to filter out the messages that we have coming in. So one of the things that I offer workshops, and these workshops are for rebooting, midlife and beyond. You could be any age, actually. We get people of all ages. But the first thing that we usually do is we address the issue of authenticity. And one simple thing is, I once had a woman, and she came to me and she just said, I'm in this job and I have a daughter and I have to support her, and the job is, I hate it. I work 24/7. I get messages from my boss that I have to have an assignment at 10 p.m. due the next morning. She felt like she was being rated positively, but she was being slapped upside the head the next day. And the truth is, she was so out of authenticity, so out of ethics with herself, that I said, the greatest gift for you will be the day you lose that job, because you will be able to open up your heart to something new. Well, she couldn't do it. She was so stuck in her own fear, stops, and blocks that she could not move forward. And as we know, we all get ourselves fired. So eventually, she was let go. She was asked to step down. And when she did that, was the first time that she was able to come back and actually look at her authentic self. We run people through exercises, and a very simple one is to ask the question and just get a blank piece of paper and say, what do I love? What do I love to do? What do I love to participate in? What do I love to say? What do I love to experience? What do I love to feel, smell, whatever? It doesn't matter. And we work with people and help them get back to their real love. And everything that you write down on this love it inventory is where you should be spending your time, because most people can't say, I love doing X throughout their week. And the challenge that I always say is by Friday, you should be able to come up with a quick list of the 5 things that you did for yourself that were so juicy in love with what you did that you smile and you beam from ear to ear by doing those things. And most of us put those completely on the back burner for the most part of the time.
Yeah.
And then the second part is to get into your blocks and stops. There's always something that's stopping us and why we're not pursuing those.
It's so funny because I do think it's important to just realize that we have to make ourselves a priority. And I remember that the universe gives us subtle prompts, right? When we need to make a change, at first it's kind of a whisper. It's a little quiet, like a nudge. You need to make a change. And if you keep ignoring it, it gets louder and louder and louder until, like what happened to your client, you get what I call drop kicked by the universe. I mean, they just punt you out of a situation and then you're standing there saying, I never saw it coming. But when in fact, you knew exactly that it was coming, at least on an intuitive or soul level.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of the rules is called, get in touch with your emotional radar detector. And mine was certifiably broken. I mean, I had been taught to cover up everything. So when you get that feeling inside, that little, I call it a crunchy, kind of spins right underneath, the breastbone, and you feel it, and it just crunches up. And whenever I get that feeling, I mean, for 40 years I ignored it, shoved it down, stuck it into my shoes, and then ate something on top of it to keep it down there. But after a while, or after I went through this 10-year transformation, I started feeling it. And then one of the other rules is speaking your piece. Most of us are trained to be so PC that we never really say in the moment, I'm not going to do an assignment at 10 o'clock at night that's due the next morning. That doesn't work for me. And it's funny how we fall victim of all this, that somehow we have to be at every event. We have to be the volunteer for everything. We have to run every carpool. We have to have every play date. We have to pick, everybody up and everything. And I became very, very clear. And one of the simple rules about speaking your piece is yes means yes and no means no. But I always add, because it doesn't work for me. Because the funny thing is, when I started adding that in, it's shocking how many people on the other side will look and say, oh, that's fine. They want things to work. Everybody wants everybody else to be happy. So in order to add that little extra piece of this is not right for me, most people will back off and support you rather than confront you, which I think is our biggest fear, is that we will disappoint or that we will be left in some state of lack. Someone won't talk to me anymore. They won't like me anymore. They won't include me in their groups. And really, people want to honor and love each other. I just think we're so trained in these practices of being inauthentic that it really is very, very limiting.
I think that's probably one of the most powerful tips from this podcast is just that sentence, no, that doesn't work for me. And that may be difficult to say at first, but I think especially as women and as moms, it's hard to have boundaries or to remember our boundaries. Our kids walk in on us in the bathroom. Some of them are sleeping in our bed. They and their friends don't even call us by our names. It's like, hey, you, or, Jack's mom or something like that. So, it's easy to lose our identities and to forget about these boundaries. And so then we just become the helpers of the world. And then suddenly we wonder why we're exhausted and overwhelmed and dissatisfied and our life isn't ours anymore. So I love that, no, it doesn't work for me, because that's a powerful tool. We're going to take one more quick break and we'll be right back with more. My guest today, Dianne Bischoff James. She is the author of the book, The Real Brass Ring, Change Your Life Course Now. And we'll be right back. So over the break, we were talking about danger signals. And I love the way that sounds, danger signals. What can we avoid or what can we know about ourselves when we see one of these signals that maybe we're not on track? Can you tell us what these are and what we can do about it?
Absolutely. Some of the danger signals, and I think they all come and manifest themselves pretty much through the physical body. Again, we are trained maybe to ignore them, but the truth is you need to be 100% aware of responses that you have in the body, whether it be that little twinge that you get that says, wow, somebody said something that was really weird. And we call it crazy talk. When someone uses crazy talk, where A plus B just really didn't equal C, I make a note of it now. I used to ignore it and think, okay, that's kind of a weird thing to say, but we carry on. Now I actually do the extra probe, and I'll say, what do you mean that boy said something funny to you? Or, if it's my kids, I will take that extra step. I will ask the 2 or 3 extra questions. I will go down the road to investigate what it is that sounded off to me. Because we all know that, but I think we're trained to do the little puppy head go, huh? Your head tilts to the side and you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to ignore that. We all know that was something off, and there's usually behind it a lie, usually some half-truth, or perhaps even deceit. It really depends. And I'm sure every mom in the world has had that where the kid said something kind of slightly off, but you let it go. And later on you found out, oh yeah, there was a party in my house when I took that trip, which was 6 hours. I had that. They were having a dance party on the roof when I went 6 hours away.
Right.
When I came back, I happened to figure it out because none of the information I was being shared with didn't make sense, but I let it all go. So some of those things are just to get, again, to be really aware of your body, be aware of what you're hearing and what you're thinking and feeling. But the most important part about it, I think, is one of the rules is to manage your wave. We are all beings of light. Everything is constantly in motion. There is an upside to the wave and a downside to the sine wave. And what I'm really careful of now, and what I strongly recommend for everyone that I work with, is that you look at what it would take to reach for the thought that feels better, which is the upside of the wave. And there isn't a situation in the world that I've been able to come up with where I couldn't think of one thing that made me feel better. And one of the key tricks is, once you're really identifying your authenticity, you're removing your stops and blocks, the next step of this is to really make sure that you are sitting in this higher vibration. And you can't sit in a higher vibration. It kind of goes back to the story I was sharing about this client where she was so unhappy, so miserable. Her daughter was feeling it. The job was too many hours. She couldn't get her kid on time. She had to pay a nanny just for picking up because she couldn't get her child at a reasonable hour. So she had to pay all this money for a nanny. So everything was out of scope. And when she finally was able to make a shift, she started taking time to reach for the thought that felt better. Let the nanny go. And actually that felt a lot better because she felt like she was more in touch with her daughter. They were developing a more positive relationship. She started really looking for what fits for me. What is that one job that would feel just smashingly good inside and, turn the frown upside down? And she started crafting all the things that would make her life feel better. Being able to get home on time, having more free time, not having to work on the weekends, not having to travel. And consequently, she's been able to find and draw to herself, because of this higher vibration, a job that's a perfect fit, where she has the flexibility and she has the understanding. And it's the hero's welcome job, not the how hard can I beat you to the floor job. And so it does work when you make all these subtle shifts and changes.
I really like what you're talking about with that metaphor of the wave, because I've used this before. In science, the form of a wave has at its lower point chaos and at its higher point form. So even in science, we go through chaos and form all the time energetically. And I think that it's important because through your book, there's a lot of talk about spiritual principles, law of attraction, manifesting, intuition. You also call it pragmatic metaphysics. I mean, it is that balance of spirit and the rest of us. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Pragmatic metaphysics, when I was going through all this chaos and change, and talk about chaos, I didn't know where to start. Physical body was falling apart. It wasn't the right relationship. I'd been in a marriage, but a marriage with a girlfriend. It was more like a fraternal relationship. We didn't have the love connection. And so I felt mostly chaos. And the one thing I tried to do to bring order to myself is I thought I'd come up with my own science. So I called it pragmatic metaphysics, which is pretty much another word for, logical mysticism. How is it that we use all four quadrants, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, and the physical, to create a life that we love? And that's what pragmatic metaphysics is about. I'm half hippie, half yuppie. I can do all the mental work, but I had to really get in touch with the spiritual side. And what I found is there's some very, very simple and practical rules that will help you manifest whatever it is that you want. Now, consequently, I'm writing a whole second book about it because I've come up with an additional 5 laws that seem to really make everything line up very quickly and easily for people. But in this first one, it's all about the basic principles of manifestation and how it's very simple to call things to yourself using all these different, the mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. When they're all lined up and in alignment, you pretty much get what you want quickly and easily.
I love
it. And that's all the basics of what you think about, you bring about.
And you talk about all this in the book, The Real Brass Ring, Change Your Life Course Now. Dianne Bischoff James, thank you so much for being here on Intuition Ignition. You can find out about Dianne's book on my podcast page, or also, Dianne, what's your website?
The website is liveyoureverything.com, and the book is also available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com.
Perfect. Dianne, thanks so much for being here with me today. I loved it.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate it.
All right.